views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to the Bronx Buzz. Tonight's program is going to feature two things. We're going to have one of the best and most important reporters from City Limits who covers the Bronx, and she's going to talk about the election and who knows what is going to turn out in the long run with this, but she'll speculate a little bit on that. Second part of our show, we're going to talk to one of the historical figures that helped save the Bronx in the 70s. He's got a new book out. And we'll be visiting with Harry DiRienzo, formerly of Banana Kelly, which is going to be very, very interesting. As you know, the Bronx Buzz, we talk to reporters and editors and writers and journalists and people who put something out in the Bronx, and that's what we're going to do this evening. So let me say good evening to Ese Olumhense. Nice to have you with us. Ese is with City Limits. Always great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Let's just talk about the election in general. Let's see, in the Bronx, 1, 2, 3, 4. Kevin Riley was more than 50%, so he won the primary in the 12th. Marjorie Velasquez, more than 50%, and she will be the Democratic candidate in the 13th. Althea Stevens won in the 16th. Predictably, Rafael Salamanca had more than 50% in the 17th. Before we get into any other specifics, how do you think it went? Did people understand how the ballot works? Was there a good turnout in the Bronx? Give us your perspective.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, for the reason you touch on, mostly because we now have a ranked choice voting system for primaries in New York City. So races, we saw lots of candidates in the Democratic races for the city council. You can rank up to 5 choices for any seat, mayor, comptroller, public advocate. The only race that wasn't kind of included in that, which may not matter to Bronx viewers, was the Manhattan DA race, because that's technically a county race and not a city race. But we saw lots of folks running, and folks definitely had questions at the polls about ranked choice voting. The city did have some language access services to help folks, folks who spoke Bengali and other interpreters, help people understand the changes to the ballot. People did seem excited about it. It was something that it seemed folks had heard enough about and paid a little bit of attention to and knew enough about to vote. We wrote a story on election day about some folks not understanding the point of it. If they came out and they had a specific candidate in mind, that was who they were going to vote for. And I spoke to a number of people who only voted for 1 or 2 people and didn't make full use of the full ranked choice ballot.
Fascinating. I didn't look really hard at any numbers. Your sense was that it was a busy primary day. I'm assuming that it was, because there was excuse me, a lot of interest generated and a lot of candidates. I mean, there's a lot of certainly a mayor's race that a lot of people were interested in. Did you get a sense that it was busy and people were really engaged?
It felt that way, and it may have just been that, we've had the pandemic and folks haven't been in kind of the same confined spaces we've seen them in. But at some sites, there was a steady trickle of people all day coming in and voting. And there are a number of reasons people come out. We know the Bronx is a very young borough. I think the census says that we have about a quarter of residents who are under 18. So folks who are interested in schools, education, programming for youth. Violence and crime are also issues that folks are definitely concerned about. Senior issues related to immigrants were also things that drove folks out to the polls. I mean, it seemed like every person I talked to had a different reason for going, but they wanted to participate.
In the special elections, way back, it seems like ancient history, in March, in the 12th council district and then in the 11th council district, both Eric Dinowitz and Kevin Riley won. They won the first round, so to speak, and then were certified eventually once they went through the ranked choice voting process. In this situation, in the 18th, with Amanda Farias and William Rivera, there's only a 96 vote difference. So I know you can't predict. My sense is that it's not good. Ranked choice voting is not going to have much effect anywhere but there. The other place it could have effect is in the borough president's race. So, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it pretty? It seems predictable that Eric Dinowitz is going to win. It seems predictable. Well, it's not to say about Amanda Farias. Seems predictable that Parina Sanchez will win in the 14th. Are we just spinning our wheels?
Yeah, I mean, it's very,
It's
very
an interesting
it
question, right?
is. It is. It's very rare that the person who gets the most first place votes, and that's what we have now from the Board of Elections, we have only the first place votes from the ranked choice races. It's very rare that the person who comes in first there doesn't actually win the election ultimately. This is really just the first round of voting. And even if someone doesn't get to that kind of 51% majority of the vote, I believe it's 15% of the time ranked choice voting is used. I read last week that the winner ultimately will be someone different from the first place winner, which is good news, I'm sure, for folks like Eric Adams, who is leading currently in the Democratic primary for mayor. He's got just under 33%, or 32%, I should say, of the vote in the entire city.
Mhm. And in that way, we should look at the borough president's race. So Vanessa Gibson has 4,177 votes ahead of Fernando Cabrera. Um, again, I don't know. It's hard to tell. Absentee ballots will be counted, and then they'll go through the ranked choice process. And people who had, people Sammy Ravello and Louis Sepulveda who got fewer votes, maybe those will move up. I don't know. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I wonder if all this is worth it. And so my next direct question, let's use the mayor's race as an example. Catherine Garcia and Andrew Yang kind of partnered as a way of kind of trying to diffuse what appeared to be Eric Adams' lead. What do you make of that? I don't like it. I think it's anti. I don't want to say anti-democratic, but I think if you're running for office, you think you're the best, and it to me it perverts the dialogue if you say, well, I'll partner with him so we can beat him.
Yeah.
I
There's
don't like it.
definitely a bit of strategy involved. We've seen other mayoral candidates in the Democratic primary endorse each other, which is a first. It's kind of an interesting move. All of these kind of alliances are done, as you said, in the hopes of kind of dislodging the momentum that another candidate has in some cases, or in other cases, and kind of getting voters to look at two different candidates as a unit. Let's say you're a big fan of Andy and someone else is a big fan of Sarah, and they're both running with some kind of strategic alliance in place. You may preference first the one you like the most, and then in second place put this other person as a good, because it still gives you some say in the process, even though it requires
Yes,
a bit of
I guess.
feeling that seems a bit more dramatic than we may be used to. I think in
Oh,
the Bronx, as you rightly mentioned, those races will be more, perhaps have more dramatic conclusions. I mean, 97 something votes. We have Vanessa Gibson, who may be the first Black Bronx Borough president, and Fernando Cabrera, her city council colleague, kind of going head to head. And maybe the outcomes won't change. We may not see a turnaround, but I'm biased. I love the Bronx. I think that, other folks listening and watching races across the city should really pay attention to those that you've mentioned.
but let's just talk a little bit about in an open-ended way. Did you see any campaign situations that you thought were interesting? I mean, there was a little bit, we had a lot of candidates. I mean, I moderated debates in all of them. Any general impressions of the candidates? Because we had many more, and that leads into a question of term limits, which opened the door for this situation. Any thoughts about the campaigns themselves?
Yeah, I think the city, like, we're in a very interesting moment. The Bronx was battered so heavily by the pandemic that really did influence a lot of both the physical campaigning, the canvassing, the door to door, et cetera, but also kind of the things people cared about. Lots of folks were interested, folks usually care about schools, but they were interested in having programming for youth, because post pandemic, a lot of that stuff had kind of dried up. We saw a lot of the campaigns kind of, I saw a lot of vans in the borough with, candidate posters and stuff all over the place, folks giving out water bottles. I mean, you never know what approach really will work. But we also saw, and I think this is something to note, there are folks who believe you should never let a crisis, a political crisis, go to waste. And we saw a lot of elected officials who are running and doing well in races, from the borough president's race in the Bronx through to the council races, who were really involved in the COVID recovery effort. Vanessa Gibson, I don't know what the exact number is, or how many trips she made exactly. She was giving out a lot of food, PPE.
Yeah, it gave it, as opposed to once a year on Thanksgiving, it gave an opportunity. I will tell you, certainly from my perspective, the numbers of forums that we had because of Zoom were just extraordinary, and certainly for us doing the TV show, even now, I mean, maybe you couldn't have been available to come to a studio today, but of course, if you could take 20 minutes out to be with us, we can do that. I think it created greater information and greater access to candidates. And I talked to many candidates when I invited them. They were like, "It's enough already. I've done enough. I don't want to keep coming back." Just before we run out of time, what do you think about the notion of many candidates? You think it confuses people? I mean, it's healthy for democracy, but in some cases, to be honest, I found some candidates weren't really qualified, and so it kind of gums up a dialogue about who really is best. Any thoughts on that? The numbers of candidates?
Yeah, I had a wonderful conversation on primary day with a woman who said something akin to, you look at all these names on this ballot, and it's kind of like voting or trying to get a diploma. You've got to study up on all of the platforms. I mean, credit to you and the BronxNet team for really rallying and getting folks to sit down and discuss the issues. But I did the math, and an average of 9 Democrats were running for every council. Yeah, and all of the available council seats. So it was a lot of people. And I think maybe this is not something that's as present to the candidates themselves, but voters really do they seemed overwhelmed by the sheer number of names on that piece of paper. I mean, in some races, it was like everyone, I had to double check and make sure I wasn't on the ballot. Because
somebody told me they wrote me in, which I really appreciated. that was it. That's my big moment in the sun. Well, it means, I think certainly in terms of what we saw in the assembly in the past, we're certainly going to get a younger and more progressive or leftward shift in representation. We'll see how that goes. Ese Olumhense, please, everybody check City Limits and make sure you read everything she does. She's so important to us in the Bronx. We got to have great people like her and great reporters covering what we do so we can have these conversations. Ese, always nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the South Bronx and rebuilding the South Bronx. We're still working on it. And there's a new book out, and we'll address that in a moment. Don't go away.